But towards the end of that conversation, I'm not sure if it was on camera or off. I think it was on camera. I raised a complaint about how you had quoted the Communist Manifesto. And
I thought you were just trying to show off, ooh, look at this new thing that I learned in the platypus reading group. and I wasn't really sure that it had much to do with like challenging my actual thesis. So I'm very curious to hear you out. What do you have to say for yourself?
Well, fine.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
All right. Welcome to the Diet Soap Podcast. Guess who's with us today? It's Ashley Frawley, sociologist, freelance writer, editor at Compact Magazine, co-host of the Compact podcast, formerly with something called Sublation, I think, if I remember correctly. And I'm glad you're back on. I'm glad to see you again. It's been too long. All right. So, Ashley, this filter on the Zoom call here with the rainbow colors because I'm trying to protect myself from you with your new article in Compact called How Society Got a Sex Change. I want everyone to understand that I am an ally. I see things through the spectrum of the LGBTQRST, WXYZ framework. And I'll be giving you trouble in this interview if I can.
So I put out 2 reports recently for MCC Brussels, one on the euthanasia debate, and try to open up some conversations, particularly in Europe and in Brussels and Belgium, where euthanasia is allowed, around, where no one's really talking about it or questioning it. And I did some interviews with people, and it was just really, really shocking. And the Brussels Times has been really good and kind of letting me do some op-eds. But it was really hard to kind of get my head around that in a really deep way and to know it really, really well. And then I did another one on the subject that we're going to talk about today on gender and NGO funding. And that was huge. That really, I spoke in European Parliament, there were protesters, everybody was mad. But I like to think that the report itself and the work that I'm doing and the op-eds that I've been writing are not actually attacking trans people. I'm talking about genderism as an ideology and how it speaks to our technocratic governance.
Well, it seems to me to be clear that if you have any sort of critique of transgenderism, you're going to just be taken to be a TERF and a Nazi and need to be absolutely opposed. You wrote this piece called How Society Got a Sex Change, and it reminded me of an old left-wing pamphlet, something about how the new subject under capitalism is a girl.
Well, that's a very common argument to make. I made that argument in relation to, the bull and on Wall Street, that sort of thing, in an article for Compact after Kamala Harris's loss on maternal liberalism. It's a common critique in academic circles, not common, but it's a critique that exists in academic circles of this ideal subject, particularly of global governance, which is a girl. And there's a very good article. Some years ago I read it, and now, forgive me, I cannot recall the author. What a shame. But she talks about how, that French movie Amélie, which I had actually, because I'm trying to improve my French at the moment. And so I'm watching old French movies, and I hadn't seen it since, whenever it came out a million years ago. And anyway, so I happened to come across this article, and she makes this very good point about that film as this kind of Amélie being this ideal subject of capitalism who is she's kind of like an every person, the film starts out with her eating raspberries off of each of her fingertips, as every person is, as everyone has done as a child, and all these sorts of things. And she's very cute and she's very quirky, but she's also very androgynous. She's beautiful, but she's boyish, right? But she's very, at the same time, very girlish, very mischievous, and she kind of goes around like deciding that she's going to solve problems for people. And it's quite funny because at one point in the film, she like walks a blind man across the road, and she doesn't like ask him where he's going, like where's he, she just like starts to describe everything for him. These people are doing that, and you're passing by this bakery and it has all these wonderful things. Okay, I'm leaving you at the station now. And then she just leaves. Like, did he want to go to the station? The guy's just like bewildered. And this is kind of like, the subject of capitalism that is wants to kind of solve problems, and regardless of whether or not other people want that, assumes sort of knowledge of how to deal with things beyond what other people are capable of, and this paper is explaining it a lot better than I am right now. But anyways, it's just sort of an example of this kind of like neoliberal subject that is feminine in its responsibility for kind of everything. Everybody got really mad about the Snow White movie, but that is another example of this sort of like neoliberal feminine subject of, again, she's quite androgynous. She's like she's very childish in a lot of ways. She's not beautiful. They don't make her up to be beautiful and like the old kind of like masculine gaze kind of beautiful. My children were like, "Mommy, turn it off. She's ugly." My kids are horrible like that. They said they're like, why does she dress like Lord Farquaad? Anyways, but they did her up in this kind of like androgynous sort of way, this sort of asexual, childish kind of way. But she does everything. Well, she can't be seen cleaning a house, so that was she got the dwarves to do that. But when she like goes to save everybody, she's got a whole damn village, some dude, all these people, but she can't enlist them to help her. She has to do it all herself. And this is like supposed to be like the empowering kind of neoliberal kind of feminine subject of like, I can do it, but it's like you have to do it. You don't have an option here. And that's the critique that I always give around like family policy, where through neoliberal feminist sort of family policy that was like, oh, you have choices. And by that, I mean, you need to go to work no matter how crappy the work is, because the main area that we're going to use to improve GDP is to get women into all these crappy service sector jobs or immigrants during this sort of transition of the economy. And you're like, well, okay, I have choices. I would like to take care of my family. And like, oh, you don't have that choice anymore. No, yeah, actually, you are obliged to choose this particular thing. And yes, okay, we will get men to kind of help you at home, and we'll try to like change gender norms and this sort of thing, and get men to like, be more quote unquote feminine. But at the end of the day, the woman kind of winds up of necessity has to do everything because she is responsible for all the problems in the world. And there's no questioning of that responsibility in terms of why things go wrong. Oh, it's your behavior. You did this bad thing. You didn't raise your children correctly. You were not intensive. You were too intensive. You didn't take your kids to the right activities. You didn't read to them. You didn't say enough words. And then you said too many. And then you were on top of them. And then you said you took them to too many activities, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, you got a problem with this? Men, you too should be like this, So instead of questioning this shift in subjectivity, it's like, no, we want men also to shift over and have this incredible responsibility for everything that goes wrong in society. So it becomes the kind of ideal feminine subject is one that takes on that responsibility as of necessity, because the stereotypical feminine had always done that. They were the sort of guardians of morality. They swept the men were in the pulpit, but the women sweep the pews. But it's like everybody sweeps the pulpit now. And like nobody is like the powerful kind of masculine subject. So that's been my kind of thesis for some time. And it's obviously, as I've said, it's building on the ideas of a lot of other people. A lot of people who argue that the ideal subject of capitalism has been feminized. And by that, I don't mean like actual women, but stereotypes associated with women. Women as like body conscious and guardians of morality, risk averse, heteronymous, so questioning their own autonomy, looking to others, looking to rules and guidelines, which were always things that feminists had actually fought against. This idea that as a woman, you're closer to nature. and they're like, well, there's nothing about my biology that necessarily means this. But that was an insulting thing. It was like, you're closer to nature, and that is why you are not suitable for the public sphere. You are not suitable for holding office or to vote or whatever. And now it's like, oh no, we were wrong about that. Everybody's close to nature. So it's a similar thing that they did with race. They took all these racist ideas that they were like, oh, black people are all these things. And they're like, oh, we were wrong about that. Everybody's all these things, you know? So they just take all these racial stereotypes and they sort of democratize them to everybody. So they take all of, in a similar way, they take all of these stereotypes associated with women and democratize them to everybody. And then in this article, I argue that part of the reason why um, the trans subject has become such a powerful ideal amongst within global governance is because this subject is further kind of transitioning, because women and men who supposedly hang on to hegemonic masculine or hegemonic feminine ideals, like women wanting to take care of their kids or whatever, and men who like still stubbornly believe in their rationality, they're all a big problem. But transition within global governance discourse signifies letting go of tradition, letting go of the myth of the ideal subject of liberal democracy, which long ago was criticized as masculine and now is sort of, everywhere criticized as a myth and so on. And this subject for them signifies someone who's willing to move beyond that. Now, I can explain a little bit why, for instance, tradition is seen in such a negative way and kind of why there is so much focus on the subject, if you want.
Well, yeah, but before we do that, I'm thinking about how, a couple of thoughts came to mind while you're describing this to me from my actual life, and I will just note, what I noted to myself was that when I go to left-wing meetings, like if I go to a Platypus Affiliated Society meeting in Portland, or if I go to the writers' workshop that I'm going to do on Saturday, generally speaking, a bunch of dudes show up. It's sometimes diverse in terms of race, but very rarely do women show up. It does happen, but rarely, very rarely, and often enough. Like at the last meeting I went to, the one woman who was there was my son's girlfriend. She didn't say much, and this, it's not as though she isn't a vocal person or doesn't have her own opinions. I mean, she has put me in my place numerous times, but in this context, she doesn't participate quite the same way. And I just this urge to be political and to try to understand society with the aim of changing it seems to be often enough taken up by men, even now on the left. But I don't know. Like I said, there are lots of exceptions. Right now, the president of the Platypus Affiliated Society is a woman. So I'm not trying to naturalize this fact, but I am curious about it. But the other thing I've noticed is that if you go to certain kinds of left organizations, like Maoist ones, or ones that really define themselves as radical and communist and everything, you'll find a lot of women, but often they're trans women. And if you find, let's say, cisgendered women, they might be trans men. They're more likely to be trans men. So I'm not sure if you can make anything of that, my experience, or if my experience is at all meaningful. It's just an anecdote, but what do you think that means? Why is it that communism today seems to attract so many trans people into the leadership and into these organizations?
Yeah, I think probably on the left it signifies a lot of this stuff as well, like a desire to kind of let go of tradition, a belief in that family is something that holds people back, and so it can kind of signify a family abolition because you're sort of abolishing our traditional reproductive role. There are lots and lots of reasons, and there are lots of reasons why it's men who wish to be perceived as women, that is trans women, why they would be more likely to be in political circles, because their socialization is usually, for the most part, has been male up until transition. And it is true that women are socialized to be passive. Women are socialized to be nice and not to rock the boat and to be quite grateful for things. And this is part of the reason why they become the ideal subject. I've talked about this a lot on Sublation Media. It's almost always women that are called TERFs. So why are they, especially hounded? Because they're breaking two social norms. One, that you are supposed to be nice and accommodating as a woman. And two, because you are not accepting this new ideology as truth. You're questioning it. And you're not supposed to do that, just generally. But as a woman, especially not, you're supposed to be accommodating. So you get punished twice for that. But this is part of the reason why women have become the ideal subject of capitalism, because that socialization, which holds us back and is really, really negative in so many ways. And when we don't live up to its ideals, we get punished very, very harshly for it, is because of this socialization. It sort of idealized this stereotypical feminine that doesn't ask for too much in the workplace, right? If you look at a lot of that discourse on the gender pay gap, it was often about men asking for too much. They were too assertive in the workplace. They overestimated their own value, whereas women didn't. And women were more realistic about their value and to employers, which is bull, because you're not at all realistic about your value to employers if you're not out on the picket line every week, So, but it's women are willing to accept their place. That's it. And women will stay up all night. I've said this before 1,000 times. Women will stay up all night to make sure that the work is done correctly. I've seen this so many times. My sister's like this. I have a lot of friends like this. They will stay afterward. You think that that's mostly men who would do that, or they'll work at home after the kids go to sleep or whatever, to make sure that the job is done right. Whereas men are I'd never do that. I was just never pulling all nighter for work. Are you insane? It's women will do that all the time. So, and they're sheepish to ask for raises. So they're great, excellent workers. They'll take crap work and feel lucky to have it. And often they are responsible for children, and therefore will take crap work because they are desperate. Marx even talks about this in Capital Volume 1. And Simone de Beauvoir quotes him about how women's responsibilities make them ideal workers. Factory owners are oh yeah, it's great because they're so desperate to feed their families. You can exploit them. It's obviously not the exact quote, but you can exploit them as much as you want. And so women's, Marx says something like women's softer nature, something like that, is used against them, and they become ideal workers. So there are hints of this, going all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. And so within movements, you will tend to have men, and you will tend to have women who are, socialized to be passive. And I have never been that way. I was raised by my dad, and so I missed out on a lot of socialization just generally. But I missed out on a lot of female socialization, and I've gotten a lot of trouble for it over and over and over again, because I'm not nice. I am helpful, but I'm not nice.
I've never known you to be anything but nice, Ashley. But maybe that's because I'm so nice that you don't have to be mean to me. But I
would get punished for it over and over and over again. So I would learn not to, over time, as I would speak up, I'd learn not to talk. Don't talk too much. I'm still terrified. I talk freely now in these sorts of conversations, but I'm always in the back of my mind don't talk too much, don't talk too much, don't talk too much. Yeah, that's female socialization. Partially explains both why we have so many men within political movements. And then, of course, because women are typically responsible for more of the childcare and this sort of thing, which is still the case. And we are atomized massively. That's the other thing about the whole childcare thing, is that it's men should pick up the slack. But we're forgetting that, first of all, we are atomized. And so it didn't used to be just parents that raised children. It was like the older children raised children, the community raised children, the children in the neighborhood raised children, the aunts and uncles raised the children. And now it's like, no, just the two of you. And the expectations are enormous, enormous. So if you screw anything up, you're in big trouble. So I have to travel a lot for work. Men don't think about that. Don't think about that at all. At all. My husband's gone all the time to the friggin' gym. Like, I swear to God, that man spends like 35 hours a week at the gym. My kids don't say squat. I go to the gym 3 times a week, and the children are like, why are you abandoning me? And like, my mother-in-law will come to me and be like, why didn't you clean the bowl? I'm like, why didn't your son clean? Why didn't you? No, but she helps me quite a lot. But anyways, it's because I have a bit of a community, I'm able to travel to a certain extent. But I am very rare in this because I live in Greece where there is still a semblance of community and family and other people that are able to take on this burden. But a lot of women don't have that, and they have massive expectations attached to them. So if you are going to be politicized, it's really hard. And you have a ton of socialization that obviously not everybody is equally socialized in these ways, which is why I said people get punished when they don't live up to it. But that tells you to be passive, and that punishes you when you're not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, there's a bunch there that I would be tempted to discuss with you just on a personal level, I guess. But what I okay, so there's two parts to what you're talking about. One is there's a lot of expectation on women to be passive and not to talk too much and not to contribute too many of their own ideas in various social situations. And there's an expectation that you take on a larger portion of domestic work, let's say, right?
There isn't like that is obviously changing. I don't want to say that like that's when you put it that way, it sounds like the solution is men should do it. But I want to point out that the amount, in spite of like automation in the home and so on, the amount of domestic work has increased because the children don't play outside on their own anymore and that kind of thing. So you're supposed to be watching the children all the time and all this stuff.
Well, I have two different questions, and neither of them have to do with men doing more because, I'm a man. I'm not going to make that suggestion. No, seriously. The first part of this, about women being trained to be passive, not to contribute too much, strikes me as something kind of similar to like the question of immigration, weirdly. Here, because everyone is very concerned about, at various times anyway, people become concerned about immigrants coming into their country and stealing their jobs, or if not that, being a burden through the welfare system. And I always think, well, those concerns demonstrate something is going wrong in society, because it should be that the more people there are to contribute with their work, the more wealth we should be producing and the more benefits everyone should gain. Right? Same thing with contributing to a conversation. In theory, the more ideas you have, the more people who are thinking together and contributing, the better the outcome should be, the more refined your understanding should be. So why is it that there's pressure on anyone to shut up? I mean, there are times where people should be, I having had teenagers now, my youngest is 20, so he's practically still a teenager. There are some people that should listen more than they talk. But when they're young and they're trying to learn, but it's very difficult to know when that is. And even young people often have to talk through and think through what they're understanding in order to develop. So you wouldn't even want to limit their contribution too much, even if they think they know more than they do, right? So it just strikes me as a very funny problem, and one that kind of cuts against my own ideology, my own kind of basically liberal ideology about how society should work, that there should be a class of people who are encouraged to be quiet. Are we fundamentally thinking about conversation and public thinking? in this context.
Okay, well, yeah, don't get me wrong here. I mean, there is a whole other conversation to be had, and I don't want to kind of go too far off the point, the article that we were meant to sort of.
No, I know, and we should get to it, but we have
No,
a
no,
little bit
but
of
I just
time.
want to say, yeah, no, I just want to say, you know, there is something to be said for listening, obviously, and learning from each other. And I think we are losing a sense that conversation is something that is learned and is an art. So often when I have in the back of my mind, don't talk too much, it is because as a younger person, I had not, it's not a gendered thing necessarily in this instance. But as a younger person, I had not, and still haven't to a large extent, mastered the art of conversation, which is normal. It's normal. It's a lifelong kind of process. Not everybody learns it to the same degree. And we are so atomized, as I keep saying, from each other that we spend less time in face-to-face situations. We become more anxious in face-to-face situations. We have less practice. Our children spend less time in unstructured back and forth conversation and play. And so, conversation does actually become something very, very difficult. And it is difficult, but it to the degree that it is learned through a long, long, long process of doing it over and over and over again, it can feel natural. If, and a very good conversationalist will feel that it is natural. And that's kind of the way that socialization works in general, that the degree to which it's learned successfully. I mean, socialization is always kind of a continuum. It feels natural. And so a lot of social norms now feel quite unnatural to us because our society has such loose bonds between people. So that's one side of it. And I also think that we have sort of flattened out hierarchies, which isn't really helpful. And I think this sort of leads us back into the trans issue, where all societies have rites of passage that you go through. It's why can I never think of who am I talking about? Oh God. Victor Turner. Sorry, Victor Turner. Victor Turner talks about how in less developed, less technologically developed societies, I'm trying to avoid the old word primitive, but anyways, in more traditional societies, you have more rites of passage. You have more like embedded rites of passage through. You go through them. A child becomes an adult. A woman becomes, a girl becomes a woman. A boy becomes a man. And you go through this rite of passage, and on the other side, you're at a higher status than where you were before. Mm-hmm. And now, even the suggestion that becoming an adult gives you a higher status is like, how dare you, or the idea that, getting married, this used to be a rite of passage. You get married, you open a home, you are now at a higher status. No, how dare you think that? Or even like graduation. That was one of the fewer sort of few rites of passage that, kind of remain very, very ritualized in our society besides weddings. But, they sort of like marriages kind of take it or leave it. But graduations, these are big symbolic events for a lot of people. And they signify an achievement. But even that, how dare you think you're better than anyone else, that you are of a higher status because you have graduated from high school, college, university, whatever it might be. So there's no sense that you should have deference for someone who is of a higher status and that you might listen to them because how dare they think that they're better? And so this kind of leads to this like standpoint theory and all of this kind of like my lived experience, and everybody has their own lived experience and this kind of thing. And in some ways it can be progressive. It's good to kind of hear voices and that might have been told to shut up in the past, particularly, as I said, women. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it leads to a lot of uncertainty, particularly around growing up. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And in our society, in which we have a tendency to fawn over youth and children. Children are the future. Children are the future. And adults, they screwed up the world, and children have to fix everything. Why would you want to grow up? Why? Like it used to be when I was a kid, some people would say, I can't wait to grow up. My kids don't say that. They're scared to grow up. And in spite of everything that I have tried to like, they're afraid to grow up. There's a such thing as a too good childhood. You have like massive exploding rates of depression and so on, which is partially because of like overdiagnosis, obviously, and explosion of diagnoses, expansion of diagnoses. But people do feel really bad in their late teens. The adolescence is worsened, I think, by this, a too good childhood. Now it's wonderful. You have the obligation to be happy. You have obligatory happiness, this romantic idea of childhood. There should be no bad feelings. We don't even believe in punishment anymore. And then you're going to grow up and you're going to go into society and it's just going to be crap and you're responsible for all the problems. There's no rites of passage. You're not going to a higher status. You're actually going to a lower status. Why would you want to do that? What and I think for some people there's now I this is just kind of me speaking. I am not sure that I would sort of publish this because I'd have to think about it a little bit more. But it does seem to me that if you were on the outside looking in at gender roles for the other gender, it can seem like, oh, those people really know what's going on. They know what to do. If I could be that, then I too would know where I fit in society because I don't know where I fit in society, but they seem to. And there are all sorts of parts of my socialization that I don't like, and that I wish if whatever it is around like expectations around masculinity or whatever. And there's like this sort of thing and sliding around what is expected of people, and a million different sort of messages about what men are supposed to be, what women are supposed to be, either hypersexualized or demure or whatever. And it's just like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want anything to do with that. But anyways, that's quite far off from where what I'm actually talking about in the research. But I do think that part of the rise of gender identity is a society-wide kind of identity crisis in terms of not having anything to grow into. You're supposed to choose everything. Everything is like supposed to be, chosen, but you're also not a subject that is seen as capable of choosing. So it becomes like I have to go on this search for my true self, and that is the project of my life and my society, not something beyond myself. Again, Simone de Beauvoir, you can tell I read The Sacred Sex again recently.
Mm-hmm.
But she says man doesn't live, I mean, it's obviously a very common thing to say, but man doesn't live to be happy. She says he lives to transcend himself. He lives for something beyond himself. But our society says, no, you're supposed to be happy. What the hell does that mean? And so people go on these sort of like quests for like personal self-fulfillment, which you will never find because it's a fleeting thing. And that's the quest, because you've already been told the world beyond yourself is off limits. The human hand on the world, that's the human footprint, that's a bad thing. The 20th century showed us what happened when human beings try to actually change the world. The only thing you can change is yourself.
The transgender dilemma serves a political purpose. It is a way to develop a different kind of subjectivity, one without any legitimation beyond internal feelings, and basically one where the test is not whether or not you're developing or establishing a better understanding of the truth or able to act in the world to make the world change as you see fit, but rather the test is how happy are you? Is this making you comfortable? And if it's not, then somebody needs to come in and rearrange things for you so you can be more comfortable. That was sort of where you're headed. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that sort of brings me to the subject of the research that I've been doing, where I've been looking at one, why are institutions of global governance pouring so much money into this? It's just humongous amounts of money and programs, and it's like, why did they choose this as the hill that they're going to die on? And you could say like, oh, it's because this is like the reincarnation of, or the next step of the civil rights movement. But I don't think that's necessarily the case, because if you look at the substance of some of these programs, and I talk about one in this article for Compact, um, for instance, for UN. Actually, I don't talk about it in the article. This article was like 3,000 words, and I whittled it down to like 1,000. But one of the things that I did want to talk about was UN documents that talk about, for instance, like coming out. So the UN, for instance, wants to put gender non-conforming people and trans people in positions of power in communities and families and in governance and in law, and they want to put people, they really want to highlight trans people. Okay, in one of these documents where they talk about this, they say, and remember, we need to encourage people to come out. And remember that coming out is not a one-time thing, but a lifelong process through multiple families, friends, jobs, cities. That is like, it's assuming this subject that is ultra comfortable with the incredible fluidity of the modern world. You will not have just one family. You will not have just one community. You will not have just one friend group. You will not have just one job. You will not have just one city. You will go wherever you need to go, and you will be adept at refashioning yourself, at recreating who you are from scratch everywhere you go. You are a fluid subject for a fluid world. Now, the reality of trans people is something totally different. In fact, a lot of trans people complain about the fact that they have to come out over and over and over and over again. But what I'm talking about is what it signifies. What it signifies for policymakers is this ultra fluid subject, a subject who is untethered from family, tradition, the hegemonic masculinity, hegemonic femininity, who looks to institutional frameworks for, I can't trust tradition to tell me how to live. I should always be looking to guidelines and frameworks, and you should too. You don't have to transition to be this ideal subject. You just have to be willing to know that what I see in front of me may not be real. I have to look to someone else to tell me what is reality. What is the official line on reality here? What am I supposed to believe? So this I've written, in my most recent book, that the ideal subject of capitalism is heteronymous. It's not autonomous. That autonomous subject, which was conjured from the soil, from the earth, from nothing, I should say, not from the soil, because it's not a real thing either. Human subjectivity is incredibly open. We can be passive, we can be powerful, we can be all these things. But they had conjured this powerful, autonomous subject of liberal democracy out of nothing and used it to fell feudalism to the ground. But as soon as they did that, the genie's out of the bottle, or the famous image that Marx likes to use, that the capitalist is like a sorcerer who's unable to control the powers that he's conjured up from the netherworld. And he means the powers of production when he's using that line. But it also is the power of the subject, the proletariat, this new kind of citizen that believes in itself and its own autonomy and believes it can govern and has been thoroughly convinced in the impossibility of any one king to govern. Right? This is, Adam Smith. He didn't say kings can't control everything. Shouldn't control everything. He said they can't. They can't. And that is why it is much better to rely on, enlightened self-interest than it is, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. Because and also like enlightened self-interest, the family was important to that, because without family, men are useless. This is what Enlightenment thinkers thought. You needed a family to discipline you. And that was part of Enlightenment. That was part of what made you a subject that was capable of acting on the world and so on. Now we don't want that anymore. We don't want that. That subject was the subject of the movements of working men of the 19th century. It proved to be an incredibly destabilizing force to the order that it itself was brought up to put into place. And it had to be destroyed. And it's destroyed all the time in this mythology, or what I call a misanthropology, of all the different ways that humanity is actually just effed, just horrible and stupid and and irrational. Rationality is a myth. Blah blah blah. Yeah, of course. Like human beings can be irrational. Human beings can be all sorts of things. As I said, subjectivity is incredibly open. What it means to be human is extraordinarily variable and open. But they have to destroy this subject specifically and destroy rationality in order to explain why things go wrong. Why does the economy that I have written up on paper, this wonderful equilibrium, not exist in reality? Because of you. There's something wrong with you. You erroneously believe in your own rationality, and men especially tend to stupidly believe that they can be democratic subjects, that they can govern themselves, and so on. Women are more like, oh, I don't know, maybe. Common, that's the socialization that we get. I'm not saying real women are like that, but that's the socialization that we get. Like, you're supposed to be accommodating, but men are not. And so they're like, get over it, men. This is all wrong. This is a myth. This is stupid. And we don't need families anymore. Family is a hindrance. It's not the thing that allows you to become a rational subject. It's a hindrance. It mars you in tradition. It stops you from going where the work is. And for them, by the way, for global governance, for like technocratic expertise, for like mainstream kind of economics, or even heterodox economics, especially like behavioral economics, and like welfare economics as well, all these sorts of these ideas of like market failure, tradition is a distorting force. Culture is a distorting force. It makes people make the wrong decisions. It's one of these, well, why do people choose wrong? Oh, because like culture, we have to understand people are embedded in cultures. And this all sounds very leftist, right? That everybody is embedded in these cultural da-da-da. But really, it's an explanation for why the equilibrium doesn't work. And so culture makes you make the wrong decisions. It makes you sort of parochial and so on. And it also stops you from being adaptable. And you've got to be an adaptable, quote unquote, resilient subject. So transition signifies this ideal subject that is unmoored from all of that, that is willing to radically throw off everything that was assigned to them at birth and radically become a subject of this new fluid, it isn't new, it's been around for a long time, but this postmodern, post-liberal world. And as I keep saying, like, the reality is different, just like the reality for women is hugely different. But that is what the subject signifies for, what transition and transgenderism signifies for them. And that's why, like, they absolutely hate the family. Like, if you listen in on like EU meetings where they talk about families, they barely concealed contempt for these idiots who think that like, can you imagine something as important as socializing, as bringing up the next generation, teaching them things, because they don't use socialization. Nobody talks about socialization anymore. It's like all bad. It's just the reproduction of a bad society. But you have this responsibility of bringing up the next worker, and you're just like not trained for it at all. Like, that's crazy. How are you just like having kids? Are you mad? You need to be trained for it. So they love, like, they constantly talk about like our rainbow families, our wonderful rainbow families, because often they have to go through processes of adoption and vetting in order to have children. And there is a process in place. You're not just willy-nilly having kids like a lunatic. You have to actually like go through a plan. So they have this idea that rainbow families are going to be better families because like if you look at like IVF now, who's the ideal subject of IVF? It used to be like the young infertile couple or any kind of infertile couple, whatever. Now it's lesbians. That's the ideal subject of IVF. That's sort of that's put into a kind of central place. Because there's this idea that like you're not doing this perfunctorily. You have to you are doing this in a very thoughtful kind of way. And so you can see this in the language that they talk. They don't talk about families at all. You'd be shocked to learn that Europeans, the majority of them, live and die in families. No, you have like workers and you have children. Ne'er the twain shall meet. And children are this thing that keeps women out of the workplace, which is really annoying. But they talk about, instead of parents, they talk about formal caregivers and informal caregivers. So parents are informal caregivers.
Hmm.
And who the hell wants an informal caregiver, right? That's like untrained, unregulated. It's like the informal market, which is a euphemism for the black market. It's like black market parenting. And so for again, this sort of like the rainbow flag becomes a kind of stand-in for them for all the things that they hate that they think are distorting for how society should work. These
Wait,
people
wait.
who are too dependent.
The
Mhm.
rainbow flag stands in for all the things they hate or all the things they love.
Oh, sorry. It stands against, let's say, all the things that they hate. So it stands for everything that they love, regardless of the reality. And in fact, this is quite bigoted because, like, individuals are individuals. Like, there are good people and bad people in any group.
Hmm.
You know, there are all kinds of political views in any group. It's like this whole thing, like in the feminine subject, when the feminine subject is now sort of on the wane, but when the feminine subject is idealized, puts women on a pedestal in stereotype form. So, like, the flip side of women are wonderful is women must be wonderful. You have to be wonderful in these ways. And so the flip side of like this discourse is like you have to be wonderful in all these ways. Which, completely erases the individuality of all these different kinds of people. And I
Okay,
say this
I
because I
want to
know, like, yeah.
I want to go back a step to the beginning of what you just said. And it was lifted from the Communist Manifesto. And when you said it, because I recently read a piece critiquing Mark Fisher, that I was a bell went off in my head, which you said capitalism is like the sorcerer who is no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld, whom he has called up by his
Conjured
spells.
up by his spells. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. But that's not what Marx actually said. Marx said modern bourgeois society, with its relations of productions, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up gigantic means of production and of exchange, is like the sorcerer who is no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld, whom he has called up by his spells. And there's an
Did I not
important.
insert a caveat? I said he was talking about production, and then I went
No,
on.
it's not.
But anyway,
It's not
go
just
on.
about it, but he's talking about production. But he was also talking about modern bourgeois society, which is
Okay.
not identical with these factories or with capital, but had its own history where, for a long while, this is what I've been learning as I've worked with people in Platypus and with Chris Catrone. But it is important, and I've been watching this HBO series about John Adams, and I watched the movie Glory, and thinking about the American Revolution, and read a quote from Abraham Lincoln about wage work. The idea in the 19th century was that the working class, as a property class, the property was themselves and their tools, maybe, had to was part of the bourgeois revolution. That they were bourgeois as well, but the bourgeois society went into contradiction with itself by
Right.
proletarianizing the workers, right? And
Okay.
in the process, they could no longer control uh, the means of production and exchange, and they society got out of whack and disharmonious, um, and so that's what uh, Marx is observing. It's a political problem as much as it is a problem of just a production. The production has gotten out of control. The proletarian has been uh, alienated from society and from their own power. And bourgeois society can't manage it either.
Yeah.
Um, so this kind of free liberal subject, that is the bourgeoisie, can no
Yes.
longer manage society or control the forces of production to meet a good end because uh, it is in contradiction with itself. So
Okay, and then how is this against anything that I said?
it's not so much that the difference is just, well, we're talking about the liberal. It's not against, like, I'm not negating it. I'm just trying to like show both sides of it. It's not merely capitalism, but actually the subject that we are both trying to reinvigorate that has lost control because of the
Mhm.
contradictions in capitalist production. So
Yes.
that
And it's
that's
destroyed for everybody, not just the working class. It's
right.
destroyed for everybody. So
Hmm.
when this is the point that I make in my book, like in both of my books, that when they talk about like, oh, people are stupid, they say it like, me too. You know, like the nudge theorists. They always use the example of the tin of cookies at a party. They're like, oh, you put the tin of cookies out at a party, and me too. I can't help myself either. I can't help myself either. The subject is completely destroyed, and this is like nobody gets this subjectivity, and this is why governance must be increasingly removed from any kind of human subjectivity. Another thing that I took out of this. I'm thinking about writing a book called Misanthropology. I might take the original article that I wrote and put it in the book as a chapter. But one of the things that I took out of that is that the science that is meant to be conjured up here is not a science of creative of like the science of people creating something new. It is an affirmation of something that was always there. The identity that people are being invited to conjure up is not something new, because I think there is like a part of like transgenderism, a possibility within it that is transhuman and transcendent, and that transcends biological um uh stops. What's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah,
Impediments.
yeah.
There's all sorts of possibility there. But in the way that it was institutionalized, it was it's gender affirming care. It's something you always were. The doctors are not creating new genitals like madmen. They are affirming something that you really, really are. They are making your body reflect a reality. And that is why now that it's not actually working out now because there's all these detransitioners who are very mad. But the idea was, I am not responsible for this because I am simply affirming a reality that was already there. And this is one thing that I always found very interesting about like detransition discourses. Like a lot of, if you read through what people say, they're like, I thought that these doctors were like scientists who knew what were the reality of trans, and they would tell me if I really was. And the doctors were like, "Well, you are if you say you are," and the detransitioners or the transitioners at the time, they're like, "Well, I am if you say I am." So they're both thinking like the authority lies with that other person, when in reality there isn't anything. That everybody's abdicating authority and judgment in that situation. Nobody is making a judgment. It's like it's all lost in process. And that is how our society works now, through pushing everything onto process and away from human judgment. Human judgment is fundamentally tainted. And so the science that like, people, the right takes this and goes, oh, this is the communists. They're trying to destroy everything. They want to transcend being No. No, in its institutionalized form, it is not transcending anything. It's affirming a prior reality that was always there. And this is a massive part of like a lot of these, fad, pop science kind of discourses. A lot of them are about affirming a nature that was always there. They're
Hmm.
not creating anything new. They're not like and in fact, like what gets pushed outside of bounds, outside of the Overton window and like the acceptable kind of polite society is like people who intentionally use pharmaceuticals to change who they are, to, what is it called? That movement. See, I don't even remember what it's called. So far, where people like intentionally use pharmaceuticals to, modify their personality, biohacking, all of that kind of stuff. It's like, ooh, because they are pushing something that is not natural. They are going beyond the natural to create something new. That is like, no, 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 no. So, yeah. So this subject, this bourgeois subject, that was like the sorcerer conjuring up something from the netherworld by his spells. It must be destroyed for everybody. even those in power.
Yeah, it's a shift away from this idea that we're trying to become something to this idea that what we want to discover is what we really are.
Yeah.
It's this kind of culture of authenticity, maybe. And the way I think of it is the difference here might be between old-fashioned cross-dressing
Mm.
and transgender ideology. Like men used to cross-dress, women used to cross-dress. It was an expression of their freedom and a demand on society to liberate people from gender expectations.
Yeah.
And an way to explore their sexuality, and to liberate their sexuality to do these things. Now, transgenderism is an ideology of anti-sex. You're not allowed to talk about how there's a libidinal component to what people are doing. And that's another way to rob people of their subjectivity.
Oh, absolutely. Like this is the thing that I got a lot of people got really mad at me when I interviewed Debbie, who's wonderful and very helpful. And I put in I titled that, trans women are men. So what? So
Mm-hmm.
what? Some men want to be perceived by society as women. Unfortunately, some of them are not successful in doing that. That's a shame. That can be very hurtful for them. I'm absolutely certain. But instead of kind of like, I know it's a huge mess too with like medicalization, all that kind of stuff. But instead of like kind of recognizing you can't sort of force perception on other people, it became like you must simply affirm, you simply must say that this person was always a woman. I see only before me a beautiful woman, not a man in a dress. That would be terrible. Like, so backward. So what? Some men like to wear women's clothes. Fine. Nothing literal has happened here. You're not literally a woman. But, fine. You don't beat people up. There shouldn't be any violence. That would be an incredibly progressive thing and had been happening as well. There had been steps along in society of like, except, oh, well, Bill is Betty now, and it's like, oh, okay, it's a bit weird, but that's fine. And it's like, you had to affirm this is truly a woman. This is truly actually a woman. No, it's a man. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Anyway, so you had to deny that there was any choice in it, that there's any autonomy at all. It has to be an affirmation of someone's true self. And therefore it denies, as you said, that agency that people had. The fullness of the human being, their sexuality, everything that goes into making a choice like that, or not making a choice like that, whatever it might be.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.